Nick Saban is one of the best coaches we've ever seen in college football. He's not one of the best coaches we've seen in the NFL. Not signing Drew Brees is not the reason why it didn't work with the Dolphins, although I think he would like people to believe that, and I think that's why he keeps coming out with it, and he's been more vocal about it because he doesn't want to admit my style of coaching just didn't work in the NFL.
Anyway, thanks for coming in.
Yeah.
First ever repeat guest on Like a Champion. Just a huge accolade. And yeah, it's just great to have you back. I think the conversation we had the first time was so much fun to explore sort of how you had repurposed and reinvented yourself coming out of professional sports, which is such a challenge, I know. I mean, of the athletes I know, coming out at 30 years old or plus, which obviously in the grand scheme of things is not old at all, but to come into, the business world and try to, change directions and tracks to a new career is challenging, right? Especially when you don't really have experience in anything like you do, being an athlete and professional like that. So that was fun to explore, and we'll touch on a few of those things. But I would love to, got a lot of other topics to broach with you. Naturally, have to talk about my Dolphins, but we'd love to hear about what you've been up to. I know you've been with CBS and you got a podcast going, and just kind of hear about that.
Yeah, so I am all in on the broadcasting, which is funny because when I started doing it, I think there's two avenues you can go by. A lot of guys in broadcasting, it's a part-time gig. They'll have other guys who maybe do real estate. They might, have investment companies. Some of them, I've worked with a guy that's an attorney. And so they do it kind of as a hobby. And I wanted to go all in and try to make it a career. And I feel like it's been best suited for me to be able to turn it into something I do year round. And that's what's kind of crazy. Some of these guys just dabble their toes in the water during football season. And then as soon as football season, they go off and do their other stuff, where I'm pretty much talking year round, about college football, dabble into a little bit other sports, but those are kind of my primary drivers of what we discuss. And thankfully for me, there's been enough storylines outside of college football with conference realignment, NIL, all the issues that it's facing where it dominates the calendar. Now with the portal opening, early signing day, there's 2 signing days, everything, spring football, it's nonstop, but it's been really good. So I have a radio show on Sirius every morning, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. So it's a good thing I'm an early riser. And then I do TV.
Is that the Dusty and Danny?
Dusty and Danny in the morning,
okay.
Yeah, on Sirius XM College Sports Radio. So that is, I'd say 80% college football, 15% college basketball, 5% other, being women's basketball. Caitlin Clark gave us a lot of content, which was awesome. College baseball, which just started. College softball. He went to Oklahoma. I went to Florida State. We actually played in the World Series against each other,
really?
Women's
Okay.
College World Series twice. So we have a lot of fun with that. But college football is our sweet spot. That's our main focus.
So you're saying outside of the season alone, there's so much going on in college football that you can still talk about it, and there's
yeah, like today,
relevance.
we're sitting here in the middle of the off season where I would say 10 years ago, signing day had already passed, and you're kind of waiting for spring football to start. Meanwhile, if you've got these major shifts taking place where there were, meetings taking place between the Big Ten and SEC, trying to determine what the future of college football looks like, not only the playoff, but who's going to have access to the playoff, how are the players going to get paid, and those types of conversations have been happening 5-6 years now, and they're wrapped around the calendar year round, and they're major, impactful meetings, decisions that are being made. Because as you know, the sport of college football, the look of it, the way it's played, the way the players are getting played, it doesn't even resemble anything that I took a part of or that you watched and fans were used to. It's a professional sport now.
Yeah, it has changed so much, and I think that, and we'll touch on. I want to go through some of those individually as we drill down and get a little bit deeper into the conversation. But what do you attribute or if anything, your continued success in broadcasting? Because I know some guys and gals come and go, and you seem to have really been able to adapt, and that environment's changed a lot, right? Mm-hmm. From, ESPN used to completely dominate all things really sports discussions for, a long, long time. And now you sort of have this long tail of niche, podcasts, and obviously SiriusXM has now, they have so many sports channels, whereas
Right.
before they didn't have that. So what do you attribute that to? It seems like my guess is there's some sort of intentionality to remain relevant and at the front of your field.
For sure. I think there's two things. One, hard work. And I think that translates in any walk of life, any business, anything you're passionate about, which I am. But I pour a lot of time and hours and energy into it. How many people are willing to get up every day at 6 a.m. and talk about college football for 3 hours? And basically I have two jobs. CBS is where I work to do television, online, digital content and stuff like that. But the preparation, I think that's when I see guys fail. So you see a lot of former players get into it. They think it's going to be easy. They can just live off their name. If you were a Heisman Trophy winner or whatever, your accolades were a national champion, and they just waltz in. And there are 133 teams. It's not the NFL where there's only 32. You need to follow it and study it and prepare to talk about it. So I think hard work. And then I also think, it's interesting you mentioned ESPN. I think one of the best things that I did was, I don't know if it was a huge risk, but it was a move that a lot of people wouldn't have made, was moving my family to Connecticut and going all in and being in Bristol, Connecticut, so where I could hop on Mike and Mike when they were at their peak, when I could hop on various sports centers, when I could, start my own radio show there and be on that presence. I mean, it is the biggest platform that's there. Yeah. So I really think that helped me build a brand that has given me this longevity that otherwise may not have happened if I had not made that move and not got my foot in the door with more opportunities, because that allowed me to continue a radio show with Sirius. It allowed me to get a job with CBS. But I think those kind of two things were what have allowed me to do this. And then just constantly evolving and trying to stay relevant and active on social media, which the busier I've gotten with my kids, the more challenging it's been. Yeah. Because I'm sure you've seen this, is, I can't stand when my kids are like this on their phone and they're scrolling. But guess what I'm doing a lot of the times is the same exact thing, and trying to create content that, is like trendy, viral, buzzworthy, all
get
those
people
sorts
engaged.
Of things. Yeah, to get good engagement on there. And I think I've been pretty good at that, especially for someone my age, to be able to kind of keep up with what the younger audience is looking for.
Yeah, and even that's always constantly changing, right? From Twitter to Threads to, Instagram and all that stuff. And, do you see that, like what I'm hearing you say is that like an advantage that you have is that you're immersed in it, right? Mm-hmm. Like I think we talked about this on the last one. Like you're not part-time, like you're constantly immersed in it. So you're just, you're up to date on everything that's going on, and you're able to talk about it intelligently, right?
Right. And I think it's equivalent. I would equate it to the same way that I said when you're a quarterback, when you're playing and you go to a new system, it's like learning a new language. And so like each system you play in as a new language, I would say like my job is kind of getting fluent in the language of college football, where the best way to do that, I'm not bilingual, but if I was, I would probably try to, if I was wanting to learn Italian, I'd probably move to Italy and try to immerse myself in it. So every day I was talking about it, talking the language. Well, because I do that, the preparation becomes that much easier, because every single day I'm involved in the latest news, the latest movements, the latest signings, so that it does become fluent where I don't have to ever catch up. And I think some guys that just dip their toes in the water, I see it happen all the time when I'll be doing a preseason show in August, and I'll hear guys mess up, and I'll be like, oh, he didn't see that. He didn't see this coordinator move to this school, or he didn't see that this player transferred to this school. And, I think it's because they're catching up. And so I'm never really catching up. I'm always kind of in the middle of it.
And I think it probably just helps just how you talk, right? You're just used to talking and putting thoughts together, intelligently, and you're not like searching for words, because it's just practice makes perfect, right? Like you're just doing it all the time. Like I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, repetition is the best. And I'll talk to young players that are wanting to get into broadcasting. In fact, a teammate of mine with the Falcons, his name's Brian Finneran, and he has a radio show in Atlanta right now. And I remember his last year or two with the Falcons, I saw him at a golf tournament. I was at Warwick Dunn's golf tournament. And he asked me, he said, hey, how have you gotten into this? How have you done this? I said, start now while you're a player. You know, I had a radio show that I did weekly when I was in Denver my last year in the league with Cool 105. And I would go in every Monday morning and we'd do a recap. And I'm sure I was awful. I'm sure I was shy. I didn't probably give a lot of strong opinions because you don't want to ruffle any feathers. But just the experience of being in front of a microphone, answering questions, turning it conversational, I think that helped me, and it gave me a little bit of a leg up on everybody else. And so Finneran did the same thing, and then all of a sudden he's been able to turn it into a full-time gig himself. So just the repetition is the most critical thing in any business or any walk of life. But the amount of hours, the 10,000 hour rules, I mean, that's always been something that I think, reigns supreme.
So you said something here that really I wanted to drill down even further, because I've known you for a long time. I don't see you that often. We've played golf some. Our wives know each other. But I have this impression of you that you talked about you were always probably a little shy on the show. Do you feel like you've had to assert yourself more in broadcasting than maybe would come naturally to you just as a in your everyday life as a person?
Yes, I think so. It's funny because I also
strong opinions, you know what I mean?
Well, also, I was conditioned to not give any opinions as a athlete. I mean, I would say I even learned that from my dad when I first started to become, when I was the quarterback at Florida State. My dad would kind of talk to me like, "Be careful what you say." Coach Bowden would tell the team, "Don't give the opponent any fuel." And so it was always, don't give them any bulletin board material. So everything I said was very politically correct. You just didn't want to ruffle any feathers. And I was a pretty good talker, but you didn't want to give any strong opinions. Like, hey, this guy, we're going to pick on this corner or whatever it was. Or I don't think their defense is that good. Like, you just wouldn't say that. You always were praising them. Yeah. And that was kind of how I was conditioned. And even the NFL, I think one of the years I was in New York with the Giants, I was voted, like the New York Post would come out with like postseason awards. And I think I got like friendliest with the media, which was perfect because it was great. Yeah. But I was always very cordial. But I just did not give them anything.
Especially in New York, I don't think you want to be
right. Exactly. You don't want to ruffle any feathers there. But it was so. I had to there was two things I had to get used to. One, giving stronger opinions, getting more comfortable, exerting more energy. Because even then, I've seen clips of me. I have a higher voice, and I was very I wasn't real
unsure,
confident.
Just like, yeah.
And so I was just kind of, you're just a little bit uncomfortable, and again, protecting what you say. So I had to do that, and then I had to get more opinionated. And I've always had strong opinions, but I didn't voice them. So then I've definitely grown in that role. And I think one of the bigger challenges me early in my career, especially when I covered the NFL, was who am I as somebody who was mostly a backup? I started 2 years, that was it. Who am I to criticize a Peyton Manning or a Tom Brady or a Drew Brees, all guys that had accomplished way more than me, or defensive players who had Super Bowl trophies or MVPs? How am I supposed to criticize them? And I think over time you kind of realize, especially when I worked alongside guys who were crushing them, who never played a down, I'm like, well, wait a second. I might be a little bit more of an authority on this subject than this guy.
At least taking a hit and throwing a touchdown pass.
Right. So you get more comfortable. And I think the further removed you are from the situation and from your colleagues, you're criticizing younger guys, it gets a little bit more comfortable. And then in college, I used to struggle with criticizing players because they're amateurs, which now has completely changed, where you got quarterbacks that making millions of dollars. So I'm like, all right, they're kind of open game now, where they're professional athletes. So I think nationally, I think that has changed, where people are more critical of college football players because they are more professional now.
Yeah, I'm just kind of like flashing back to the old Mike Gundy rant.
I'm a man. I'm 40. That one. Yeah. And he was defending his players. He was, because the media was criticizing his players. That's what sparked that whole rant.
Looking back, do you you're at your point in the broadcasting career, and obviously things have gone well for you, not without any, speed bumps along the process. Like, is there anything you could definitively go back and say, you know what, I wish I had known that back then. It would have made it a little easier on myself? Or
yeah, there's a few. One, I would have started earlier. So I mentioned doing a radio show, but it's funny because I didn't start really at ESPN until 3 years after I was done playing.
Right.
So because I had started this investment management company, I had And I think most players have I would say love-hate, but it's mostly a hate relationship with the media. Like, you don't like the guys that criticize you.
Yeah.
So I never wanted to be one of them. And then again, further time kind of went out there, and I got into broadcasting more on a whim than anything. I had a buddy that I played golf with who worked with the NFL Network, had worked with ABC, and he was like, hey, I think you'd be a good broadcaster. Would you want to try it? And so I called a game in NFL Europe, and I enjoyed it. And then I kind of got the bug. I did Dolphins preseason radio, their 1-15 season where they were awful. But the investment management company had kind of come and gone by the wayside. And so I was trying to figure out, what am I going to do next? And really, that's when I made the decision to kind of go all in and say, all right, I want to make this a career that I could do full time.
Yeah. So you would have started earlier. That's the main.
I would have started right out of the game, because there is a huge advantage in having the brand recognition, the newness, even schemes, change dramatically over a few years, roster turnover. There's a lot of, I would have been more familiar with a lot of the players that I played against at the NFL level. So I would have started earlier, and it's because I love what I do. I wasn't sure if I would love it. Like I've always said, I got married when I was 30. If I would have met my wife when I was 22, 23, I would have loved to have started sooner, because we've had a great marriage, right? But everything serves a reason. It's for a purpose.
Yeah.
And who knows if we would have made it. Like I might not have been any good at broadcasting right out. Maybe those 3 years I did mature enough and got more confident and was able to be more, outspoken and critical. And so, but I would have loved to get a head start and used my time as a player more advantageously.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good perspective. I feel remiss if I didn't ask. AI has changed a lot in the world, some professions more than others to this point. Are you seeing it in your world for better or for worse? Are you using AI in any way personally that's helping you?
I'll use it to help me condense the information I get. So every week I get a packet of information that's probably 40 or 50 pages deep. And so I'll use ChatGPT and say, hey, can you cut this down? Bring me the highlights. And sometimes it'll miss stuff, which is interesting, because I'll kind of go back and double check it. But it really does a pretty good job of condensing the info so that I get what matters, as far as the preparation that goes on the packet. I can even say, eliminate, I'll say, just give me the top 25 teams, because that's really what people are kind of focused on. Or I can say, if there's a specific matchup in the notes, I can cut them out and it can give them to me much more on a platter. But I do think it's interesting, because I can tell that a lot more of the writer roles, game recaps are being done with AI, where it probably is taking some jobs from people where you normally would have a beat writer or somebody at the game that would give a recap and have it fired up by a deadline. And now I think it's all just automatic after the game. And again, I think you can tell a difference, but I feel, and it's interesting because I've listened to other podcasters and people that just give opinions for a living, feel protected some way from the AI, because how do you give opinions if you're generated content? So I think I'm protected, but you never know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely have a brand, and you mentioned that earlier. And will AI be able to? I don't know. I still think that people want some sort of human connection in life, right? And I think it serves a purpose. And I've done similar to what you've done, where I ask it to summarize data for me. I've created an assistant and put in all of my training materials for what I do in M&A, and there's thousands of pages, and I can query it, and it's incredible how quickly it can source that for me and bring up, hey, find for me the three different types of business owners, and boom, it brings it out at page 700. I'm like, this is saving me a lot of time for what I'm doing. And so
it's funny. So I was doing this past season, I did a pregame show with CBS Sports HQ, and there's 4 or 5 of us on set, and there was one host who's kind of older. He actually is a professor now at University of Florida. He just left after the season, and we always, we put out tweets to promote our show. And I was asking some of the younger, because we have 3 of the crew is 20-somethings, they're in their 20s. And I was like, hey, I need a creative tweet to promote our show. And they were struggling to come up with it. And my buddy goes, hey, I'll come up with one. He asked ChatGPT what to come up with. And it was corny. Like, it wasn't creative. It wasn't catchy. It was just very promotional. Like, details, here's our show. And he even tried to tell it to make it tantalizing, make it intriguing.
Edgy or
and it just couldn't. So I think those are some of the things. It could have come up with a very straightforward, like, hey, make sure you watch us from 9 to 12. Here's how you watch. Here's what games we're going to be discussing. But it can't go on there and, say, hey, I think Florida State's going to lose today, or so-and-so is going to win the Heisman Trophy in this game and we're going to discuss, or giving a stronger opinion, being like, hey, the SEC is going to get exposed today, or, like somewhere along those lines, which I think those are the differentiators with, human interaction versus computer generated.
There's definitely some limitations now. I think I read somewhere from an AI expert, just the speed in which it's improving and learning is scary, where it's like microchips double in speed every 5 years or something, or 3 years, and this is every 500 days or something. It's incredible. But
so have you messed with Grok at all on X?
Oh, you know what? Just literally 2 days ago.
So I've messed with it a little bit, trying to come up with images, more like memes, where like, cause I tried to do one.
I'm a meme guy myself.
Right. So I tried to do one and this is probably a month or two ago, where I was trying to create an image of me on a football field wearing an ACC jersey with like a flag, and it could not. So you can put in your image, but it wouldn't come up with an image of me. And though I've seen other people do it, and I don't know if there's somebody else with my name, but it could not do it. I even gave him a picture of me and had it try to generate it. So I have to see if Grok 3 will be able to do it. But it was an epic fail, my attempt.
Yeah, I tried to do one the other day. Just said, hey, well, it was under one of the ChatGPT's, paid versions where you can create images and stuff. It's like, we'll create an avatar of your dog. I'm like, oh, great. We have this rescue dog. It's kind of unique looking. And I kept having to tell, like, there's no white on his face. Like, take the white off his face, and goes, oh, yeah, sure, here you go. And it just, the same thing, like white face. And I'm like, I told it 4 times. Like, it's clearly some things to be worked out. But so let's move on to college football. Obviously, you're probably tired of talking about this, but at least it's still probably changing a lot to where we're not talking about the same thing. But to me, the 3 big things are NIL money, right? The transfer portal, and then really also conference realignment and movement, and to a somewhat of an extent the college playoff, but that's new. I would love to hear where you think it's headed, the good, the bad, and how you think this is going to shape out.
So since 2021, which was July 1st, 2021, was when NIL became legal. It also coincided with the transfer portal being opened up, where you didn't have to sit out a year. And it also kind of coincided with the conference realignment. So since 2021, we have seen more change in college football than the previous 100 years. It's kind of like we're talking about ChatGPT, like how fast it has changed that dramatically. Like, we don't have the Pac-12 anymore. That was a 100-year conference. I would have gotten in trouble if I had taken a meal, if I had a booster buy a meal for me in Tallahassee, even though we did get a lot of free meals. I would have had to sit out if I would have transferred anywhere. If I would have transferred to Virginia or Duke or Stanford or USC, I would have had to sit out a year. And there's no way transferring to 3 schools was unheard of. Now we've got players getting millions of dollars. We have players, some players playing at 4 different colleges in 4 years or 5 years. And we've got no longer have the Pac-12. We have a super SEC. We have a super Big Ten. We've got the ACC hanging on by a thread with Stanford and Cal in it, that are on the West Coast. It has been probably one of the biggest shakeups in any sport, that we've seen. Some of it, I think, is exciting. I sure wish I had been a part of the NIL era, because I probably would have had a lot more money
especially
in the
as
bank.
A quarterback,
Right. I mean, the amount of money that's out there. I love the new playoff. I like the expanded playoff, so I think that's one of the things I'm excited about. I think is better for the game. I was always told, this is 15 years ago, that debate was good for college football. Like, when you argued over who were the two best teams when it was BCS, or even before the BCS, it was you could have co-national champions. In 1990, it was Georgia Tech and Colorado were co-national champions, and that was supposed to be good. Like the debate, it drove conversation. Then the BCS, then the 4-team, and it was that was what I was always told. I always felt leaving like somebody got cheated. Somebody didn't get an opportunity. Somebody got screwed over. 2017, I felt like UCF, when they claimed a national championship, they didn't get an opportunity to play for a national championship. They got left out, even though with 4 teams it was supposed to be all-inclusive, but it really wasn't. Now we've gone to 12, and we're probably going to 14 or 16 pretty soon. But I think it has done a lot of good for college football that teams like SMU, teams like Indiana, even Penn State, who never got into the 12-team playoff but would have gotten in more than any other team in that 12-year history, I think that's good for those fan bases that keeps them invested longer in the season. So in the month of November, I thought was one of the more entertaining Novembers because you had probably 30 teams that were very much alive and felt like they could make the college football playoff, where just 2 years ago, we were probably down to 6 or 8 teams that felt like they could make the 4 spots. So I thought that was great. And we had rivalry games like South Carolina, Clemson with massive stakes for both of those teams. We saw, games that just didn't really hold much weight except for very regionalized or local, fan bases. I want to win this rivalry that actually meant they could make the playoff. So I think the expanded playoff was one of the better things of the sport. The thing that is driving me crazy, again, this goes back to talking about it every day, is the uncertainty of how do we fix the issues that plague us. So we have NIL, which was created so that players could get paid for their marketing, essentially. It's the name, image, and likeness, but originally it was created so that if you had a Tim Tebow or a Johnny Manziel or a huge name brand that still had eligibility, he could go, be on TV for a Dr. Pepper ad. He could sign a deal with a car dealership. Essentially, it would be a marketing, so you could accept marketing dollars. That was and I actually was like, all right, that's a pretty good compromise. We're gonna make, that doesn't seem American that you couldn't make money.
You're not making money as a player. You're an amateur athlete, but you could make money.
Right. And very quickly, some schools took advantage of faster than others, but once a couple of them, the word got out that, we can pay this player through our collective and he really can do some sham of an autograph signing or show up at the Boys and Girls Club for an hour and we'll pay him $100,000 to do that or $500,000. Then it's just quickly evolved into no one knows.
Paying you to come here.
We're paying you to come here and no one knows who's making what. And you can come here for 1 year and the next school pays you. There's just too much mayhem, which the players have been the biggest winners. The players, well, I should take that back. The agents of the players are the biggest beneficiaries of this. The agents are making 20%.
Yeah, on the marketing stuff. Yeah.
Again, it's not marketing though, but that's what a marketing company would take from you. But they're kind of still falling under that umbrella. When the NFL, the NFL agents are capped at 3%. That's the max they can make. So they're making the most. The players are huge advantage for them. They have more power than NFL players. Because an NFL player would love to test free agency, every year after big years,
sure.
But they are locked into contracts. So players, essentially, they can test the waters anytime, see what the market is. Meanwhile, the schools are trying to figure out, how am I going to get an 85-man roster and how do I know who's going to be here in 2 years? They have no certainty of who's going to be on their roster.
It's crazy that the NFL was always the one, well, these guys are mercenaries, right? And they're getting paid and they'll move around a lot. Well, if you think about it, NFL players are moving around less now than a lot of the college players, right? Mm-hmm. Because your rookie deals, if you're drafted, minimum of 4 years.
Right.
First rounders are locked up for 5 with a team option, right? And then, most of the free agents assigned with teams, usually you got 2 to 3 years of guaranteed minimum, guaranteed years in there. So it's like now all of a sudden, the tables have totally turned and the college guys can go, I remember Russell Wilson and guys like him and like Jeff George, those guys were few and far between that played college at 2 different colleges, right?
Right.
Now it's like.
Well, and it's like a lot of things in our society. The pendulum was way over here. And then we've gone all the way over here where all of a sudden they have more leverage than NFL players. And the thing that drives me crazy is we know this issue for 2 or 3 years now, and they can't come up with a solution. And a lot of it is the courts. A lot of this is they're trying to figure out, the NCAA and the school presidents don't want them to be employees, which would be the easiest solution, because then you could sign them to contracts and you could have them under multi-year, contracts. But they don't want to do that, because then they'd have to provide benefits, they'd have to provide workers' comp, they'd have to provide a lot of things that would get much more costly.
Yeah.
So there's this House settlement, which is supposed to be approved in April, and that's this $20 million salary cap that every school is going to have access to the TV money, and they can pay the players straight through the school. But that hasn't been approved yet. And so that's very much up in the air as well, if they're going to be able to do that legally, because the players don't have they don't have a union. They haven't, like the players think about a player who's 15 years old now, when he comes into college, he didn't agree to that. Like, okay, you're going to cap my wages. So it's all, that's the thing that is frustrating to me and a lot of fans that I hear from is, when are we just going to get a system in place that everybody kind of knows the rules we're playing by? The players, the coaches, the schools, and it's still uncertain.
Yeah, it seems like if you could take the best of what it used to be and what it is now, like the playoff, like you said, there's so much more parity and so many more relevant teams with a 12-team playoff. And the mobility of the players helps in the sense that they're not totally locked into a place where they don't have to sit out for a year. Like, take the best of, because the playoffs were fun.
Right.
You know what I mean? That was super fun. But then, somehow if there's a way to bring back the old conference rivalries, because I think it's a shame that we lost that.
I think that's gone. Like, and I feel so, and this could be an age thing, right? This could be I'm an old man, and the golden era of college football was the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And then it felt like the BCS kind of things started changing. More money came in, kind of corrupted the sport. But I still think the caliber of play is off the charts. Like, players are way better now. They come in, the quarterbacks are playing as freshmen. You're seeing guys like Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State have record-setting season for them. Like, the talent is better than it's ever been, and it's only going to get better. But I do feel the thing that made college football special was the passion from the players who did dream of playing college football just for their, the color, the name on the jersey, like the corny songs. And it might be corny, but that really, like, when you lost and I was at Florida State, or when I talked to other players that I played with in the NFL, like, it hurt. You did not want to lose because of your pride that you had in your institution. Like, I went, and there was very much like that was passed on class to class. Like, the seniors taught the freshmen what it meant to be a Seminole. And now the senior class is like 3 or 4 guys that are hanging on, and maybe there's a couple transfers that came in from Arizona State or some other school. So, like, that really passionate playing for your school mindset, I think, is just fallen by the wayside, which I thought made college football special.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I've always watched. My dad was a Oklahoma Sooner, and those colors are all around our house growing up. But then we grew up in South Florida. The Hurricanes of the 80s, and the Noles too, in the 80s and the early 90s were unbelievable teams. And you don't, obviously, South Florida football is not like it used to be.
Right.
So that part is kind of the nostalgia of maybe even heightened. Because,
the biggest, so that one of the moments that hit me so hard when I went to the NFL was after our first loss. Because if we lost the game at Florida State, it was absolute devastation. Yeah. Like, the whole week was going to be miserable. You just felt like it was like a funeral. Like, you had to almost kind of work your way back into a positive mindset. How are we going to bounce back? But you just felt so defeated. And I remember in the locker room after our first loss, when I was on the Giants, it was like a little bit quiet. But then about 15 minutes, a couple guys come out, "Hey, where are we going tonight?" I was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "Yeah, where are we going?" I'm like, "We don't go out. Like, we go out.
Yeah, we're not working tomorrow,
right?"
Like,
yeah, and they were like, "Yeah, let's go." And I was like, and like, you didn't go anywhere after a loss in college because you were so devastated. Like, you might hang out in your dorm, just have a few drinks, and like commiserate. And then we went out and was like, we're at the club and everybody's having a great time. Like, what happened to that? And you just get used to losing. And I think that's kind of crept into college football.
Well, I remember back when you used to play at Florida State, you guys used to play Miami like week 1, like Labor Day weekend, like right out of the chute, a massive game. And back then, losing even a single game in the season, as you noted, is a big deal. Now it's sort of a big deal, but I mean, just to start the season like that with the biggest rivalry of the year is amazing. But do you think even the NCAA stays involved?
The
Are
NCAA,
they even have jurisdiction or relevance? Or is there a scenario where they're not even?
They've already lost it. Right now, it's very. They have little to no power in college football. They have no say. They have lost every meaningful court case to any player group, any, really.
It seems like they're so behind
They
have
always been reactionary.
Even with player safety.
Right.
Like the NFL is like, I shouldn't say ahead of the CTE thing, but they were ahead of college when it's like, all right, we're going to limit hits in practice and padded practices because, we're finding it's the subconcussive blows that are causing CTE. So we can't have 3 days of hits and and NCAA was like, no,
they
we're not going to do that. It's like, well,
reactionary on everything. They have not been proactive at all, and it's cost them their very existence. They'll be relegated to what they were originally created to do. They'll run championships for soccer, lacrosse, like the non-revenue sports. Basketball is probably going to go. They might have some impact on the NCAA basketball, like the March Madness. But college football, and that's part of some of these meetings that are going on right now. There's already discussions of a CEO role being created to run the Power Four.
Makes total sense.
And then
to me.
they'll
Like,
govern the sport. They'll govern. So the NCAA is basically deemed irrelevant in college football.
I think that, just being somebody who was an agent for a hot minute, but like, I kind of don't feel bad for the schools or giving coaches, $100 or $150 million guaranteed when the players were making $0. Like a lot of those guys, as you know, will never get paid anything.
Right.
They all think they're going to go pro.
Right.
It's just not. Just the numbers are not the case. So it's hard for me to say, well, gee, it's a shame that it is what it is now. When you had guys, $10 and $15 million a year contracts fully guaranteed, and players make $0. I'm like, that's a little bit.
And I have evolved big time in my view of what the players should get. I was probably one of the last people standing that fought for amateurism. That's why I mentioned before, I thought NIL was a pretty good compromise. Like, yeah, you should make money if you can make it. But I always felt there was a lot of value in a scholarship and free room and board. It drove me nuts when players were described as slaves because I felt like I was royalty on Florida State's campus. Like, we had great treatment. We had the best medical care. We had great living standards. Like, it was great. Like, I loved it. But to your point, so I would get asked this and push this when I was at ESPN, like that was when the movement in 2013, 14, so 10, 12 years ago, it's when the movement really started to get noisier and louder. And I would always push back because I was worried about what would happen to baseball and soccer and women's sports. Like, what if there's not enough money? But the amount of money that's flowed in, even in the last 7 or 8 years, has been so much greater that it was like, all right, there is plenty of money to go around. And there probably always was, but I was genuinely concerned about what it would mean to the non-revenue sports. But at some point, it was, all right, there's enough money to go around. And I think the NCAA probably 20 years ago, they could have, again, they probably would have been robbing the players, but they could have given them a little something and it would have quieted a lot of the crowd if they would have given them a little piece. And they gave them like stipends of $1,000 a month. But if they would have given them, even if they would have created funds for them that they could have gotten upon graduation, like incentivized graduating and getting a degree, they never budged on everything. They fought tooth and nail to keep the players completely amateur, to not give them anything. And again, like I said, they lost every court case, and now it probably cost them their existence.
Yeah, it just felt like it was super inevitable. Then you had coaches, you try to preach all these great principles and things, which I loved what it stood for on the outside, but then a coach leaves before a bowl game for another school,
right,
for a bunch of money, and the players are sitting there like, well, we can't leave because then we have to sit out a year.
Right.
Like, it seems so inevitable. But so that brings up my next thought. Like, do you think now the status of being an NFL coach, and just forget about the money. Just coaching in the NFL might even be that much more appealing as opposed to college. I mean, like Saban retired,
right?
And now Pete Carroll's back in the NFL at 70-something years old. Like, do you think that makes it just because the NFL still got the draft system and
right.
CBA?
Their structure.
Yeah, right.
I think that does make the NFL appealing. But I will say this. I thought there was going to be a definitive trend of college coaches going to the NFL that were sick and tired of the uncertainty, players bouncing from one school to the next. But we've seen it work both ways. We just saw Bill Belichick come back to college, somebody who's been the greatest that we've known, dipping his toes in this water. We've seen multiple coordinators. Wink Martindale was a longtime NFL coordinator, came back to be the defensive coordinator at Michigan last year. So for every example of a guy going to the NFL, I think there's almost been as many coming back to the college game. Steve Belichick, Bill Belichick's son, went to Washington before. Now he's obviously at Carolina with his dad, but he was in college football the year before, which I think impacted Bill's decision to get in the game. They had hired at Washington, University of Washington, Pete Carroll's son to come back to college. So I think I think there's some coaches. I think Saban definitely retired because he did not like today's players' mindset, which the very last conversation I had with Bobby Bowden before he died, it was probably 3 months before he died, we were sitting just like this in his living room on a couch in Tallahassee. And we talked for about 45 minutes. We talked about faith. We talked about family. But I did want to know what he thought of the state of college football and where it was going and players getting paid. And he said, and I totally agree with him, he said the hardest thing in today's game and going forward is going to be how do you get guys to buy into the concept of team? When it is, because I hear so many players, I got to get mine. I got to secure my bag. I got to get my yards. I got to get my stats because they want to get their money. And I do think that was something, and Saban he's on the record saying this, that the moment it hit him, because I think he was already getting uncomfortable, he didn't love the way the direction of the NIL was going and the turnover and the transfer portal. But he said after they lost to Michigan in the Rose Bowl, that more players came in and said, how much money am I going to make next year, and am I guaranteed playing time? That was the questions. It wasn't, how do I get better as a player? What can I do to help Bama? What can I do to make sure this doesn't happen next year? It was all about the selfishness and the selfish decisions that the players wanted to make. I think that's the moment that Saban was like, I'm out.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And basketball, we've seen, Coach K gets out, Roy Williams gets out, Jim Larinaga at Miami gets out, Tony Bennett gets out, and all of them have said, I don't want to deal with it anymore. And I talked to a lot of coaches, and some of the, horror stories. It's all relative when you say horror stories because these guys make millions of dollars. But coaches, talking about a mutiny, like their players aren't happy, they weren't getting paid. I had a buddy of mine works at a collective for a Big Ten school, and he said he got a text from a player. He actually showed me the text, and it was like, hey, when's my payment coming through? And they had just lost by 30, and he got it within an hour after the game. And the player was like, hey, where's my payment? Not even worried, talking about before losing a game. And this was a basketball player, so it was you lose, but it's just the mindset. Where's the awareness, the sense of awareness to at least wait a couple days before you go in?
Larinaga's speech was really powerful.
Yeah.
He was like, hey, Coach, I'm leaving. And he's like, we just got done going to the Final Four.
Right.
Or, I forget what it was, finals.
Yeah,
the Final
they went to
Four.
Final
He's
Four.
like, what's
Yeah.
wrong? He's like, nothing, just better opportunity somewhere else.
Right.
We had so much success here. It's really crazy. And so just sort of drilling down a little bit further in the sport, I feel like the reliance on the quarterback, especially, I would say, college, yes, the NFL specifically so. Do you feel like the game is overly reliant on the quarterback, the way it's set up now with the rules?
Somewhat, but I think the sport itself is pretty cyclical. And I think we're actually seeing a resurgence of defense and run game. I think the NFL is a good example of the Eagles. Jalen Hurts is good. He's not great, but their defense was awesome. They had Saquon Barkley. And I think in the college game, you've seen a little bit of that. Georgia, Their quarterback play wasn't great. Made the final, made the college ball play, but they didn't win it all. And it was interesting because when the 12 teams made the playoff, we went through and one of the doing this every day, you figure out ways to discuss things. Yeah. Ranking the top 12 quarterbacks in the playoff, there were a lot of better quarterbacks that did not make the playoffs. Like Cam Ward at Miami didn't get in. Yeah. Shedeur Sanders was the top. He's going to be probably number 2, but he didn't get in. So the quarterbacks that were in were good, but they weren't great. Like Will Howard was good. He had a great system around him. And he was really solid. He was probably one of the more underrated quarterbacks, and he had the last laugh with a national title. But Riley Leonard at Notre Dame, who played in the finals, he was not a great quarterback. He was not even top 20. So I think what has happened is teams have realized, we can neutralize some of these quarterbacks with great defense. We can get after them, and we can run the football and keep it away from them. And I think that's kind of where, the game is it's this ebb and flow. But I think there clearly is always going to be a place. I mean, the game is quarterback driven, but I think teams have realized you can still win with defense and physicality on the run game.
Yeah. I think that I think you're right on the pendulum. I've seen some stats that I don't have handy about how it seems to be going a little bit the other way with average quarterback rating of winning teams, right, of Super Bowl winning teams and playoff teams and such. I would like to see, and I think a lot of fans would like to see, a little bit a more lenient enforcement of the rules against the quarterbacks.
Right.
I mean, I personally don't want to see a quarterback get blindsided and laid out, but if he's going to wait to the last second to slide, that is a different ballgame to me. Some of the interference calls seem weak. Hitting a completely defenseless receiver, I would like to not see that anymore.
Right.
So I'm totally fine with that.
I think everyone is, when I say everyone, I mean the power players in the NFL and the power players in the conference commissioners, even the NCAA to some extent, are terrified of liability. That's why they've gone so far, because the NCAA has already lost a couple lawsuits to, CET cases,
really?
Players that, so they've already lost some of those. That's why they've gone, I think, too far. Because football is supposed to be a violent, dangerous sport. Like inherently, I remember that was why I wasn't allowed to play. Like you could get hurt, it's that risk of injury has always been there. Now that doesn't mean you should let players get concussed, but there are hits that should be allowed. That I think oftentimes the officials see a collision and they just throw the flag. They're like, oh, it's got to be a dirty hit.
And it's almost always going to favor the offense.
Always, absolutely,
right?
always.
So
yeah. So I wish they would adjust targeting because now targeting is, college players get kicked out of the game. They are reviewing it, but I think they should have flagrant 1, flagrant 2, style like they do in basketball. Because I would be okay if they judged intent, and because I think you can tell when a player goes headhunting, especially if they're looking at it on video. Yeah. They get to review it. You can tell a lot of times the offensive player ducks his head last minute, player's trying to make a play, and they collide heads. It's accidental. Where I'm okay still giving it a penalty, but ejecting the player is too far.
I just remember, the glory days to me of NFL football in the 80s. In the 90s, there was a lot of different ways to win, right? There's balanced teams, there was run-heavy teams. There was Dolphins were pass-heavy. They didn't win a Super Bowl, but they won a lot of playoff games, and it was fun to see the different ways that you could get, to the end game. And now I feel like you've made the point correctly. I think the pendulum has swung a little bit, the other way, where defense and running and what have you. But I think for a long, long time, it's just been you either have an elite quarterback or you don't.
Right.
And just teams rebuilding just so they can pick first or second in the draft. And if you crap out with the wrong guy, then you got to start all over again. And you're stuck for 4 years. And so that to me is a frustration that I would like to see them sort of turn the knobs and just to see the diversity and the different types of offenses in the league. I think we're
seeing a return to that.
Yeah.
Because you saw the Ravens do it with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. Now Lamar's pretty elite, but he's a runner. And he's a really good passer. He tore it up this year. But I do think you saw them. You saw the Eagles. You've been given examples like the 49ers with Brock Purdy, who was 7th-round pick, but they pair him in a great system where you don't feel like, oh, I've got to take a quarterback with a top 5 pick. Even Jalen Hurts was a 2nd-rounder, and they were able to develop him, build around him, give him good defense. But I think of all the quarterbacks in the NFL playoffs, 14 teams, there were 12 of them were first round picks.
Yeah.
So it's still that's pretty quarterback dependent.
And look at the allocation of money.
Right.
On the veteran
20%
deals.
of the salary cap's going to the quarterback salary,
I mean,
which to me is too much.
Is at minimum. So well, I guess I would hope that because if you see guys like Kirk Cousins get signed on massive deals, and Tua just signed a big deal, and so it's like if they don't work out, Tua didn't play 6 games this year, as you know.
Right.
And there's a few other examples that probably are escaping me now, but look at the deal that Deshaun Watson signed.
Yep.
And Russell Wilson. It's like you're screwed if you sign a guy, and you have to guarantee him.
Right.
QBs are getting 4 and 5 years guaranteed, and it's like it's wiping out your salary cap space so much that you're crowded out from signing other impact free agents, right? So hopefully the pendulum goes back the other way where it's a little bit more balanced. I think I'd like to see that in NFL, but I think all of this leads to the fact that you're ready to become a soccer fan. I think, right?
I am. I mean, Brady, my youngest, is all into soccer.
Oh, perfect.
So yeah,
and
we're into
the songs are so much better. You can
They
make
are.
a song for anything.
I've come
in
a
soccer.
long way. I used to hate on soccer. That was big. I used to love trolling the soccer fans.
Oh.
Man, oh my gosh, they would get so worked up because I would have fun. I'd be like, oh, we're watching it. It must be the World Cup every 4 years. Like people are talking about soccer. So the guys I work with on my on Cover 3 podcast are diehard soccer guys.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not super dialed in. They'll tell me, what was the day we had match day? Was that what it was, like a week ago? 2 weeks ago, there was the big day with the Champions League, Premier League, where it was all coming down to the wire and all on the same day was like being played. So they're keeping me a little bit up to date with it. I did go see Messi play a couple times in Fort Lauderdale. So that was pretty cool. So I'm working my way there.
The biggest criticism is the lack of scoring, right?
Right.
But I do think, and there are definitely boring soccer games, but people forget too, I think it's like there's boring football games too.
Totally.
Like a 10-7 football game is 3 scores, and field goals aren't that fun.
Right.
So you a 90-yard touchdown, that's super fun.
Right.
But I think there's definitely 0-0 1-0 games that I think are pretty fun. But the thing that's like, to me, you have to think about, and I'm selling you on this right now, but like the game, I've watched football since I was a kid. The games become, they're longer and longer and longer and longer. So you have excitement spread out over this much, where soccer is spreading it out over this much, right? The ball's always
you know
in
exactly
play.
how long the game's going to be.
But the thing that's endangering that is now they have their version of instant replay.
Mm-hmm.
So
VAR?
Yeah.
Look at me.
So
What's going on?
yeah. See, you're paying attention. I don't even have to sell you.
Right here.
But they're doing, they're doing so much of that now, and I get the intent. Especially there's things like offside that's it's hard to catch sometimes because it's so close. But I just feel like if we just keep doing this, and now we're going to review every goal that happens, and now you're spreading it out, and you're ruining the flow of the game. Like there's a beauty to, like, we all have places to be.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, especially our society, I don't think we're trained to go to 81 home games a year for baseball and watch a guy, scratch himself every time before he pitches the ball. Like the pitch count, I think, has been great for baseball. So that's my thing with soccer.
I'm curious to know how you feel about this, because I've always been anti-replay in every sport. But people
like purists,
really want to go, I want to get it right. I want to get it right. And it slows down the game. And I don't even think they get it right in football. Soccer is probably more clear-cut. You can see the exact line. Did it cross the goal line? Was it offsides? I mean, they have great technology that shows you. But in football, even the Josh Allen play in the playoffs versus the Chiefs, where they were looking at it and you still couldn't really see the ball, and all it did was slow down the game.
Yeah.
And so I would actually be okay. I'm okay with human error. I'm okay with that, but the gambling element where people, a lot of millions and millions of dollars swing one way or another based on a bad call potentially. I would rather do less replay than more.
Yeah.
Because of what you're talking about. It slows down the flow of the game. And I actually think it's part of sports is having controversial calls. Like, I don't ever want to feel like there's impropriety or something nefarious is going on. But I'm okay if somebody misses a call. I mean, as a players miss plays, throw an interception, pick six. Like, I think it's a human element that you want to have qualified professionals calling games, but they're going to make mistakes. I don't feel like we have to get every single one right.
I agree with that, and it's like there's 22 guys running around on the field at the same time, like, in a lot of collisions happening, and it's just there's no way you're ever going to get all of that right. And I just think that it takes away from the feel and the flow of the game, and soccer's headed in that direction now. And I get that offside's super close, but it seems to take them forever to figure that out.
Right.
Now, the ball going across the goal line, the refs have watches.
So it's easy.
It's like instantaneous. The watch goes off.
Right.
If the ball crosses this much. So that's why I was like, with the Josh Allen thing, like, this should be a piece of cake.
Right.
Like,
they've tried. I think they experimented with it in the preseason, having like a chip in the ball.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a weird thing where soccer's one ball, it's right there, you buzz it, it goes to the line. This one, it could have crossed the line, but where was his knee? Or where was his elbow? Or where was the player, the body part down, where they have to sync those up? But it is kind of crazy that the amount of billions of dollars are in the sport, and you have some 60-year-old from 30 yards away kind of guessing, let me run across. And he's kind of
12
trotting
dudes in
out
the pile.
Yeah, and he's like weaving his way, like kind of going up a little bit back, and then he just puts his foot down, puts the ball down. The amount of slippage that is out there in the NFL with yardage and little,
You still have the chains.
Yeah.
25.
Right.
Still doing the chains.
I'm surprised that they've held on to that for that long.
It's admirable almost, but not quite. But so we talked about this before. My son's heading to FSU in June, and I'm now outnumbered. So I'm married to a Knoll, as you know.
Yep.
As are you, and you're a Knoll. I'm hoping that they can have a positive experience with football after a record bad year. Do you think Norvell can turn it around? And what's really, because I don't think it's been a recruiting issue so much. He just hasn't seemed, he had one good year, right, where, obviously Jordan Travis got hurt, which was unfortunate, but mostly with transfer guys that bailed once they go. Like, do you think he can turn it around, or like, what's the fatal flaw there?
I think he can. I thought they were too portal heavy in the philosophy, like in this portal era, NIL era, which I think is going to be highly volatile for a lot of teams if you take that approach.
Yeah.
Colorado was a great example. It's kind of flip-flop. Deion Sanders' first year at Colorado, heavy in the portal, flops, they're 4-8. They face some adversity, kind of tails off toward the end. Next year, 10-win season. Like, they kind of captured it, they hit it, things were going good. They were able to carry the momentum. Florida State, they start finding some guys, a Jared Verse, they find some players in the portal to come in, and it works. They go undefeated, and that's, we can live that the whole controversy of them not getting in, but it worked. Like, they were undefeated ACC champs, great season, and then they were like, all right, perfect, portal's working great, let's go right back to it. Signed some really good players in the portal, what they thought were good. And then what I think the challenge is going to be in the portal era is when you go with that philosophy, I think there's a tendency, I saw this in the NFL, when if you don't have an emotional attachment to the team, to the university, to your teammates, the minute you face adversity, you're just going to kind of like, all right, well, my check's still going to clear. I'm still getting paid. And there's going to be more of a temptation to quit. And that's what I thought happened at Florida State. Like, once they were preseason favorites to contend for the ACC, to make the playoff. I even saw some people say they would make the Final Four. And then I'm sure those players thought that was going to be the expectation too. That was the goal that was set. Then once they lose to Georgia Tech, it's like, all right, we'll still be okay. Then they lose another game. And then all of a sudden you're out of the ACC, right? I mean, when they played SMU, I'm sure you watched that game and loved it.
Yeah.
They look like they threw in the towel the second half. Like, it's just, and they missed on a quarterback in DJU. They missed on some players. And then they don't have really a depth of character and, camaraderie and team that I think you need to endure adversity so that you're still out there clawing away to get 8 wins or 7 wins. Like, at that point, you're like, we'll show up, we'll play, where's my paycheck? And that was a mentality that I saw in the NFL when you saw guys start to go through the motions, and I thought that happened. But the good news is this roster is going to look different than last year's that quit. So they've gone out, they've got some more players in the portal, they've got some more recruits that have been in the system that are familiar with what you want to try to do. But both coordinators are new, which is good and bad. Like, it could work. Gus Malzahn's coming in to run the offense. They bring in a quarterback from Boston College who feels like it could be a good fit. The ACC isn't too deep, so you should have one of the more talented teams. But they start off with Bama. Like, what happens if they lose that game? Are they going to bounce right back? Or are they going to be like, oh, here we go again? But I do like Mike Norvell. I think he preaches the right things. I think he's a great, mind. I like his process. I think he teaches the right things, but I think he's in the process of learning how to create a roster in this environment, which everybody is. A roster that will be consistent and consistently competitive.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely struggled at the quarterback spot, which surprised me a little bit just based upon what people were thinking DJ would do.
Right.
But
I wanted Cam Ward. I mean, I kind of made that known. I thought he was the best quarterback available in the free agent, in the portal market last year. And I thought DJU would be I thought he was conservative as far as taking him to Florida State, but I thought he would provide a floor. Like I thought the wheels
kind of
wouldn't
a safe
come off.
bet, like
yes,
yeah.
And they came off, and he struggled with his confidence big time.
Yeah. Well, I think I didn't play a lot of quarterback growing up at a high level, but enough to know that confidence is definitely important. And if you're getting second guessed and making decisions, it's hard to make them even as quick as you need to do them in that sport, right?
Yeah, he was shot. I mean, you could tell. A lot of times, you don't even have to watch the film. You can watch a quarterback's eyes and his body language. And I just saw a quarterback who looked lost, and like it was done. I was like, that's why I was probably after the third game, I thought they should have benched him. They left him in there a little bit longer, probably 3 more games. But I just thought you needed to get him out of there to get him a rest. Like just let him get a breather and get off the field and regroup.
Yeah.
It probably wouldn't have mattered, but.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's good to take a break, right?
Yeah.
But how about the Dolphins?
Man.
Longest playoff drought ever. I'm very opinionated on the Dolphins.
Good. I was down at training camp last year, sat down with Mike McDaniel, sat down with Tyreek Hill, sat down with Tua.
Okay.
All of them individually. I was down there with Sirius. Felt great. I think I predicted them to make the playoffs. When I talked to them, they embraced the lack of playoff success. They embraced what had happened the year previous when they lost in Kansas City in the cold game.
Yeah.
And they were kind of like, they were willing to address it and say, we're going to make it better. Bring in our new defensive coordinator. Like I felt good about the team. I'm obviously you're concerned about Tua's health. I think you're always going to be holding your breath no matter what. And that is even how much they protect the quarterbacks. I mean, you can bump your head against a teammate, and he could go down. So I think that's a real issue. And then with Mike McDaniel, who I like the player-friendly coach, but I do think players can walk all over you if you cross that bridge and you go too far that way, and it leads to a immature team, to not a very disciplined team. And I think that's kind of what the Dolphins are, or were this past season. I don't think he's very. And again, I would love to play quarterback for him. I think he really builds up the confidence. But the quirky, fun, racing the camera, it's fun.
Yeah.
But I just don't know how much it's creating a team that's going to be a winner.
I just don't feel like he's got the strong enough personality that locker room needs. Not that every coach can be Dan Campbell,
right?
But I think there's just, and that would be no guarantee that you would win, and they've done well. But Andy Reid, a guy like that is just like a strong, consistent force.
But so I think his players love playing for him. But he knows when to draw. He knows when to draw it back, and they respect him, and they'll get in line. Again, I talked to a lot of players. They love playing for Andy Reid. He lets them come up with plays. He lets them, he has a period at practice where they get to practice the plays they come up. Remember they did the ring around the rosy play at the Super Bowl last year when they won? He lets them do that, but he also can get on them, and that's where I don't know if McDaniel has that.
And it's interesting to that point. I think after Ross came out right away at the end of the season and said, Greer and Mike are going to stay here, but we need to make this right. And then all of a sudden, their rhetoric changed right away. It was almost like they were starting to put their foot down, knowing that almost like Ross said something about listen, it's great to be a player's coach, but like you said, at some point you got to put your fist down, when guys need to straighten up, whatever that might be, coming to meetings on time or whatever.
Right.
It's accountability. That's all. That's what it is. And everybody has a boss, right?
Right.
The coach, the players have a boss, the coaches have a boss, the team owner has a boss, and that's the fans, right? They want wins. And so I agree with that. And then the other thing with me is, I'm a finance guy. I love the business of sports and football. I was so excited when they decided they were going to rebuild. in 2019 because you know how important the draft is, right? I mean, it's cheap labor. You got guys locked up for 4 and 5 years. It's obviously not easy. There's no guarantees with any picks. Even the first round, I think 20 to 30% of guys go to the Pro Bowl, right? Ever.
Right.
So
Right.
like even that, but like as you go to later rounds, it goes way down. I've done all these analytics, but you've got to build primarily through the draft and then fill free agency, add depth and key positions. I was so excited when they did that because I felt like, and Greer was giving the proper leash. They get time to build the team. And then after 2 years, they start trading all this draft capital and paying huge contracts to guys like Tyreek and Jalen Ramsey and Bradley Chubb. The way I see it is quite simple. You have 2 forms of currency as a GM, okay? You have money, which is scarce, right? Also because of the salary cap, and you have draft picks, which are scarce. You only get so many of those. To trade draft picks and pay huge contracts to one guy, you're giving up both forms of capital when you could go either draft people or you could go to free agency and get guys and not have to give up any draft capital, right? So you could go those 2 channels and only give up one form of capital. In this case, you're trading, both forms of capital. I think they built that team to win now last year and the year before, and it didn't happen. Obviously, injuries happen, but I would argue we also got guys that had a pretty substantial injury history in Tua and Tyreek. Not so much Tyreek, but Bradley Chubb. Jalen Phillips is a great player, an amazing athlete, documented history of injury. So I just feel like we were started under the right course and we got super young, right? We're the youngest guys in the league, and then we started going the other direction. And now I think next year will be worse than we were this year, unless we get lucky with the injury bug, which to me seems unlikely.
Right.
So, they drafted a great guy in Chop Robinson. He was, maybe second in the league in rush and pressures this year. So, it's not like he doesn't hit, and it's not like he doesn't get good players. Javon Holland was a great player until this year because of injury. So, it's frustrating to see that because I feel like they did get really close and they had a lot of really good things. And Tyreek was the best weapon.
And that's where I felt.
Maybe since I've been alive.
Right.
2 1,700-yard seasons in a row, just unbelievable.
Right. And I felt like they made that signing, realized the window with Tua was right there, and they did it. I think it's interesting because totally agree with you on the approaches that you could have. I do feel like the teams that do it best have a combination of both. And it's kind of like college football when you're talking about recruiting classes and portal. Like you got to be good at both, all bottom line. But you can go to one or extreme or the other. Do you remember Les Snead, the GM for the Rams, when they won the Super Bowl with Matthew Stafford? Remember his famous line was "F them picks." He was he traded away everything. He brought Matthew Stafford in, sent Jared Goff to Detroit. Jalen Ramsey was one of those. Odell, they brought in a lot of talent, and it worked. But now they're paying the price for it. They just trade. They're putting Cooper Kupp on the trade block. They're having to renegotiate Matthew Stafford. And then you've got another example in the Eagles, who have been really good at the draft. I mean, they draft half Georgia's team, but they find a Jalen Carter. They, drafted Jalen Hurts in the second round. They pay a couple guys. They make the trade for A.J. Brown to bring him in to give, a good receiving option across from. So Howie Roseman, that's why he's always, people rave about him because he's kind of done it both ways. So that's what makes it one of the bigger challenges is figuring out that puzzle. But and you can win one extreme or another. But the best teams that are most consistent do both
sustainable.
Good. Yes,
right?
They do both good. They don't make huge mistakes.
It's funny because last year there was somebody out there had suggested trading Jalen Waddle before we re-signed him. I'm like, that's actually a perfect example of somebody that you would trade.
Right.
Still on his rookie deal, great player, but I was starting to worry about his injury concerns, especially because of his frame. Again, great player, team player, no problems. And people are like, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous bit. And I said, well, look at some of the greatest trades that ever happened.
Right.
We're trading good players. When I was a kid and you were a kid, Herschel Walker got traded, and that made a dynasty. That trade alone, we traded Tunsil, who was a perfectly good player, and got a boatload of draft picks. So, if you don't get good enough draft capital for him, you don't trade him. But, I would make the argument, it doesn't take any talent to go trade for a really good player and give the other team all the draft picks they want and then pay that player what he wants in terms of that doesn't take talent as a GM to do that. It takes talent to find value in a draft in the second round and the third round,
Which is, you
and
mentioned
beyond.
the trade with Jimmy Johnson, what he built the Cowboys with. You remember he said championships are won in the third, fourth, and fifth round when you find players of value. And they might not even be guys that ultimately become Pro Bowlers. They just become really good players that know their role, that kind of fit where they fit in. And then you surround them with a Troy Aikman and an Emmitt Smith and a Michael Irvin, and you've got like this perfect formula.
Well, think about that too. Like they say you hit on a third and a fifth rounder, and your first and second are, what they are. You have this first rounder who's a Pro Bowler and a second rounder who's a solid starter, and then you get a third and a fifth. Like that's 4 years of labor that you don't have to pay a guy on a veteran deal. That means you have that much money to go out and free agent and fill holes and add depth, right? So to me, it's just like any GM could go out and say, hey, give me your best player. I'll give you all the draft picks you want. I'm sure there was a back and forth, but I mean, we gave up a lot for Tyreek. We gave up a lot for Ricky Williams. So I just feel like it's the easy way out. And I'm sure there are times like at least Ramsey, I think we only gave up like a fourth for him and he got paid and he's been pretty good. But to go out and do that, I think is not the recipe for certainly not a sustainable amount of success, maybe a one and done like the Rams did, but that's always been just frustrating to see that, especially when I thought, hey, we're doing it the right way now. Like it's gonna take a few years, we got young and then the whole Flores thing happened. That was kind of the beginning, and then we got tampering. We lost the first rounder that way, but
you know what I was blown away by? How much the players hated Brian Flores, and how much
crazy.
and
nobody really knew it until he got fired.
More so
fans.
Was how much he damaged Tua, and the players saw it. Like and some of the stuff has come out now, but Brian Flores like publicly in front of the team tearing Tua apart.
Was it because it wasn't his guy?
Maybe. I don't know how
it's
that.
It's like you go work at a company and somebody hires you.
Yeah.
But it's like
maybe. But I also think he came from the Belichick tree, which is where Belichick famously coached Tom Brady that way, right? Belichick would chew Brady out and say that kid over the high school's better than you. Like maybe he watched that and was like, oh, that's how you motivate. Like that's how you get the best out of a player, to really put that chip on his shoulder. But that's Tom Brady's a unique breed.
Yeah.
Some players, that's what I think separates the greatest coaches. They know what buttons to push for every kind of player. Not there's no cookie cutter. Like this is how you
53
coach.
53 different guys.
Because you're a lot of times as a head coach, you are more a psychologist than an X's and O's guy. You're like Dan Campbell. It's a great example. He set the tone of the organization. We're going to make a new culture, and we're going to get tough guys. But I guarantee you, he coaches the players differently. Like he treats Jared Goff differently behind closed doors than he does their defensive tackle or their linebackers. And I think Flores just thought, okay, I watched how Belichick coached. That's how I'm going to coach my quarterback. And it almost destroyed Tua. Like that was what the players that I've talked to said. It almost ruined him.
And he was only really like that with Tua?
I think he was like that with everybody. But again, quarterbacks are a unique breed. We talk about DJU, the confidence factor. You knock out a quarterback's confidence, he's done. And think about when they signed Mike McDaniel. Remember the FaceTime on the plane when he was like built. As soon as I'm building him up, hey, I'm your guy. You're going to be my quarterback. I mean, I think that has done wonders for Tua.
Yeah.
And I think that was the smart thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, injuries aside, he's had some bad games, and I know there's the narrative there about big games and stuff. But, I mean, he's clearly the Dolphins are a dangerous team when he's healthy and playing well. I mean, and Marino had bad games too, so it's not fair to expect that they don't. But, like, he's – when he's on, they're really fun to watch.
And I think he's good with the system. He makes those quick decisions, get the ball. He's highly accurate. The one thing that I wonder about Tua, and this doesn't mean that he couldn't win a Super Bowl, I just don't know if he's that difference maker. Like, I think you can win a Super Bowl with Tua. I don't know if you win a Super Bowl because of Tua, which is similar to Jalen Hurts, who just won a Super Bowl. They didn't win because of Jalen Hurts. They won with Jalen Hurts, and he did a great job. But there's certain guys, and there's probably only 5 to 6 quarterbacks that you can win because they're putting the team on their back, and that's Burrow, that's Lamar Jackson, that's Josh Allen, that's Patrick Mahomes. There's only a select few of those, so it's not like you're criticizing Tua, but I think they just have to do a better job of giving him a good defense. Yeah. And the weapons they've got for him have been pretty good.
Offensive line, they lost their center last year before the playoff game, the year before last, that was really disruptive. And then this year they didn't have the protection, I don't think. And Waddle, they couldn't get him involved, and Tyreek, but yeah, certainly the other pieces they need to put around him. On the running game, we lost the running game this year.
Yep.
Last year it was dangerous, but recently Nick Saban came out, and I don't know why this seems to come out every 5 years, but they talk about Drew Brees and his time with the Dolphins. And I know your dad was the team doctor then, and I still see him to this day. But he came out, and by the way, he gave a very confusing. I'm certainly one that understands that medicine's not like a perfect science, and
right.
None of these doctors have crystal balls. They're just trying to predict based on what they know. But like, I don't know. Did you see the comments from him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was like, he goes and talks to Dr. Andrews. Andrews says that Brees is fine and Culpepper's knee's screwed, but then we signed Culpepper.
Right.
And then, like 2 weeks before, interestingly enough, before Saban came out and say this, Dave Hyde was on Joe Rose, and he was talking about how your dad basically sent these, examination reports to like 6 different doctors or something, and they all were like, and obviously the Saints were the only other team
right.
looking at signing him. I'm just curious, like your take on that,
right?
And making sense of it. Because my friends were telling me Brees can hardly lift his right arm anymore.
Right.
Like he can't even. He throws his football with his left hand with his kids. So it's crazy. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Nick Saban is one of the best coaches we've ever seen in college football. He's not one of the best coaches we've seen in the NFL. Not signing Drew Brees is not the reason why it didn't work with the Dolphins. Although I think he would like people to believe that, and I think that's why he keeps coming out with it, and he's been more vocal about it, because he doesn't want to admit my style of coaching just didn't work in the NFL. Like if you talk to the Dolphins players, they couldn't stand Saban. Like leaders of that locker room could not stand his approach. It was very collegial. Look at Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer is a great example. It was a total flop in the NFL because you have to adapt to a professional mindset, which again, I think that's one of the reasons Saban got out of college football, because they started to become more professional players. They have more say, they want reasons, they want, you have to handle them differently, and he didn't. There has never been a time that I don't think Saban's been in an organization and he hasn't had the final say. So he likes to say, it wasn't my decision, I wanted Brees, because I think if he wanted Brees, he would have signed him. And you're right. I've talked to my dad a lot about this, and I think my dad is very private. He would never come out publicly or do an interview, and he actually tells me, like, hey, just don't, it's not a big deal. Yeah. Like, don't say anything. But, I've talked to my dad about this for 15 years, since it happened. And you're right. What Dave Hyde said was pretty much true, because my dad and the medical staff, it was Dr. Caldwell, my dad, Dr. Indelicato, there's multiple doctors, and this is a big decision that they have to make in free agency. My dad didn't do either surgery. None of the Dolphins doctors did the surgeries, so you go talk to the doctors that did. You get multiple recommendations, multiple opinions on what direction you think it should go. And so you had quarterback, which at the time you had 2 pocket passers. I know Dante Culpepper, people might think, oh, well, he was more of a runner, but he was a pocket passer. And you had Drew Brees, pocket passer. And you had one coming off major reconstructive shoulder of his throwing arm, and you had one that was coming off major reconstructive surgery of a knee. Both of them were in the rehab process. Both of them were kind of question marks as far as what would they be eventually. But I think both of them, the majority opinion was they'll both be okay in the long run. But from the standpoint of how long it would take, I think it was Culpepper could be ready week 1, ready to go. And with Drew Brees, it was he can play, but you're not going to be able to throw the ball deep down the field. He might have some limitations through half of the season. Longer term, we think he'll make a full recovery, but you're just going to have to work with him a little bit early. And that was the advice that was given. There was never, like Saban said, he failed the physical, which isn't true. Like he didn't fail a physical. He was given both the opinions of all the doctors that were involved. He'll make a full recovery, but you're going to have to work with him. And Saban, said, well, what do you want me to do with a quarterback who can't throw the ball downfield? That was kind of the response. And that was like, hey, well, can you work around it? Can you, this is what it is. And he chose Dante Culpepper, and I thought at the time, like, if you were talking about, like, what would you rather take away, it was, you can work around a player who maybe has a knee injury, but a shoulder injury, like, how do you coach around that?
Yeah.
And I
especially for a guy that can't run, really.
right,
He's not
exactly.
known for that.
I just think it's Saban, trying to find excuses for why it didn't work at the NFL level. And I think he would love to think that if he would have signed Breeze, he would have won Super Bowls in Miami, when I don't think that's the case. I thought Sean Payton did a phenomenal job with Drew Brees, the quarterback, confidence, developed him. He was the only one that really believed in him when no one else was, because it was the Dolphins and Saints were the only two teams that even talked to him that were in the market, and the Saints were the one that took the risk and jumped on it, but also developed him, because Drew Brees he was okay, but he wasn't like, oh my gosh, this is some must-have QB, hottest QB on the market. There were question marks about his playing ability as well. Like, was he going to be a franchise quarterback who could win you a Super Bowl? That was very much in question. And I thought that's where Sean Payton deserves a ton of credit for bringing that out of him. That even if Saban had said, all right, we want to sign Breeze, I don't know if that comes out of Drew Brees with Saban as the coach.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight for sure. And I think that you're right, that I think people forget the context that he's coming out of San Diego, where he's sort of just like
they drafted Phillip Rivers because they were like, all right, we're going to go in a different direction. Like, he's okay, but we want to get better.
Yeah. No, for sure. Great context there. So moving along, kind of just winding down, but you brought up Bobby Bowden before, which I was really happy to hear that, and interesting, his sort of take on college football. What would you say the greatest lesson is that he taught you, whether it be directly in dealing with you or just in his style of dealing with people, with players, with coaches?
I'd say the lasting like legacy for Bobby Bowden was his faith. That's the one thing, and I grew up in went to a Christian school at Westminster, was raised in a Christian home. That was one of the reasons I chose Florida State, was because I knew Bobby Bowden was a Christian, that he was a man of faith. He professed that when he recruited me. Mark Richt was my quarterback coach, same, mentality, same faith. But I didn't know if it was legit. Like a lot of like when they hear you're a Christian, they're going to sell you on that.
Hey,
they'll come in there with their Bible in the back pocket and let me read you a psalm, but you never know when you get there if it's going to be what you thought it was. And he was 100% all in with his faith. I mean, he preached to us all the time.
He was authentic.
Authentic as it gets. I mean, he would present the gospel to us Friday nights before games, to the whole team, 100 players in a room. He would ask, did you do EE and evangelism and explosion? In high school.
Yeah.
So he would ask us the questions. Like, he would ask the team, he's like, boys, if you don't know what happens to you when you die, you need to find out. He's like, because it could happen tomorrow. He was and he's like, you need to meet Jesus, and if you don't know Jesus, you need to talk to me, talk to the team chaplain. This is every single week before every home game, every game, Friday night. He would give like a 10-minute sermon, and that was always how it finished. So that was like the anchor of faith that I saw for him. And I had this from my family as well, but like I saw that, and it's been, so important to me in my life and my family, was the faith aspect. So that was it. But the other thing I really learned from him, and I would say this is something similar I learned from my dad, was treating everybody the same. You see a lot of people who only treat certain people with respect, with cordiality, with, just a niceness. Coach Bowden would treat the biggest booster in the program, the biggest donor, the same way that he would treat the fourth equipment manager that was a freshman, that was a nobody, or some kid on campus who wanted a picture, or a family. He treated everybody with a kindness and a gentleness that was just, it's pretty remarkable when you think about how many people asked him for pictures and hugs and an autograph, and he always gave not only autograph, he would ask like, hey, how's your family? Where are you from? He would just give that little bit of extra time. And I thought that was something that I saw firsthand that I was like, man, that's pretty special. I grew up in an environment where I got to see a lot of famous people being around my dad and going to Yankees and Dolphins games. And that's definitely not the case with a lot of celebrities or people of influence. And, fame where they blow off a lot of people. He never blew off anybody. He was always there. And I think it was because of his faith. He wanted to kind of shine, let his light shine in every opportunity that he could.
That is so neat. Do you think that's part of what made him great at his job? Is that like maybe the players saw that and they wanted to play for him?
I think so.
They just
authenticity.
felt like he was worth giving it their all.
Yeah, I think the authenticity that they saw, that he was real, and you didn't
And he would
have
do
to
anything
be Christian.
for you, shirt off your back kind of guy.
No,
Yeah.
and we had to go during training camp. We had to go to church twice on Sundays, and Sunday's your off day. Like that's not a fun thing, right? You just want to be able to sleep in.
Yeah.
And we went to a predominantly Black Baptist church, and then we went to Tallahassee, First Baptist of Tallahassee. So that was the primary of the white church. We went to one weekend, and then the next weekend we went to another. And he, made that a priority early. And he would say to the whole team, hey, if you're Jewish, if you're Muslim, if you're atheist, if you don't want to go, just come talk to me. And a couple players opted out and said that and took that avenue, but he never held it against them. And I think that openness and that authenticity, like that to me is what, and even you don't have to be a Christian to be authentic, but I think that's what people respond to. And I think that's what the players gravitated towards. He really, to me, was a father figure more than a coach. He was a figurehead coach where he delegated authority. They had coordinators that called all the plays and did all the schemes, and he was kind of the face of the program who directed traffic and, dealt with the players more on a relational basis than the guy that had to chew you out.
Yeah. So, it sounds like a really unique sort of setup in terms of like his structure and how he coaches it. Do they even have that anymore, or is it?
I think there's certain coaches that delegate, and then there's, and you've seen this in all walks of life, in every business. I think some business owners, entrepreneurs, whatever it is, they trust their employees, like, hey, I'm going to assign you a task, go do it. I don't care how you do it. There's others that micromanage, that want to see, like, give me an update every day. Let me get your, let me see every detail. So there's different ways. His style was probably more unique than I saw. And I played for some Hall of Fame coaches. Mike Shanahan with the Broncos was much more involved. Dan Reeves was a Hall of Famer, who's also a Christian.
Yeah.
But he was much more involved in things offensively, delegated the defense. But Coach Bowden was pretty unique in that he really was more of the face, where he didn't, and it was funny because the big joke around the team was like, did he know your name or not?
Oh, yeah.
And he definitely didn't know. It was, hey, buddy, how you doing, buddy? Like that was, everybody was buddy until you became a starter. And so my junior year when he said Danny, I was like, oh, I've kind of made it, because I was buddy for a long time. But that was kind of where you kind of felt like you made it, was when you knew your name.
Yeah. That's really funny. Wayne Heisinger was known for calling people chief.
So yeah, right.
I was always chief. He probably saw me once every 2 years. So
right.
I don't blame him. But
right.
Any good books lately?
I've read Ted Turner's book. Have you read Ted?
No.
It's really a good book. I'm actually probably about 3/4 of the way through it, and it's fascinating. I heard it, somebody recommended it on a podcast. So it's not a newer book. It's been around for a while. I have the paperback version, but his upbringing is pretty, interesting, where he's a boarding school kid, went around, but hearing how he built up, CNN, and it started with a billboard company, was like the advertising billboard company was how he originally made some money, and then he started in radio and started in local TV, and then started buying up, local stations.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And then how he got involved with satellite TV, and that's how CNN came about. It's pretty interesting. And then, it's interesting because he talks a lot about failing as a father and failing as a husband, and, some of the sacrifices that he made because he was so maniacal about being successful as a businessman. It was pretty interesting. But I would strongly recommend it. It's been pretty good. That one, and one of my all-time favorite is Steve Jobs' biography. This one's a little bit different.
Yeah.
It's a long one, but I read through that one pretty fast, where I do like those, I like to read, biographies and autobiographies of people that have succeeded, and hearing because everybody's different. Everybody's got a different story of how you got where you were. Shoe Dog's another one. Phil Knight's book is phenomenal. I love that book.
Yeah, that was one banking crisis after another, or
Right.
capital crisis, right? Like just we
Right.
don't have enough money to do.
Right.
It is fascinating. It's inspiring at the same time. Just like anybody that's in any line of work, that can be frustrating at times. Like, oh, okay, definitely not alone.
Right.
You know, and so those autobiographies are super helpful.
I have not read like a novel. Like I used to read like John Grisham books, like, you know, and then you read like 10, you've read them all. Like all of a sudden they're very redundant kind of with the lawyer, you know, the law aspect of them. But I've just been more into, you know, reading more, you know, biographies and the like than just, you know, like reading some fiction.
I'm still, I'm the same way. I really don't read any fiction at all. I'm limping my way through finishing The Rational Optimist after seeing however many successful influential people talk about it. I'm finally reading, but it's basically, the premise is everything that we've achieved as really a civilization is through collaboration and minds coming together, and those ideas breeding on top of each other. I mean, this phone being a result of thousands and thousands of people collaborating to pull the material out of the ground, to program the software, to creating, you know, the cameras and all that stuff, and that's really neat to see.
Because that's interesting, because you said you're crawling your way. I feel like this TED book that I've read, and I think it's because of the phones. I struggle to read longer for one period of time. Like it takes, like I am in Windows. I'll either fall asleep or I'll just get distracted, you know? And that's what concerns me, because our kids being on, like I don't see my kids read many books unless they're assigned from school. And even then, I think they're speaking of Chat GPT, they're probably using that. Give me the Cliff Notes or whatever, the Spark Notes. But it has been even more challenge for me to focus on a book, even 100%. If it's good and I like it, which is kind of scary. 100%. I want to try to retrain and go back to where I could focus and read for an hour and just sit down and just enjoy it and process it, as opposed to mind start racing.
I worry about that, the concentration, memory issues as a result of being much more short-term, you know, sort of, I mean, I'm not on TikTok, but I'm just using TikTok sort of quick screens and
Reels
scrolling.
Are the same on Instagram, all of it.
And so, I agree. I think it's got to be trained habits. But I was going to ask good movies, but I feel like there's not really movies anymore other than like
or binge watching, you know, shows.
Yeah, Kelly's had Mad Men on. I know that's an old one, but it's just been on loop, and I'm like, it's just, you can kind of just zone out on that. But my last question would be, we do this with everybody. We're at Rebel Motors, as you know. We have a lot of really amazing sports cars and classes and everything. If you get to build out your dream car,
so I bet you've had
you got to think of something. What's your personality?
Man, I'm such not a gearhead guy. I would probably, it's funny because my daughters, their dream car is a Lambo, like to get a Lamborghini. And every time we drive by one, I'll be like, do you think I could fit in that? Like asking them from a real, like, and they're like, probably not. I'm like, well, all right, well then that probably doesn't make sense for me to drive.
What about
I
your
would say my
personality?
dream car, so I would say my dream car would be, and actually the owner of our club has one. It is an old school Bronco. That's probably like a early 70s model. And it's remade. It's a beautiful blue. It has some bigger tires on it. He's got the tops off. And I just,
those are neat.
It's even before, it's not the OJ white Bronco. It's even before that, so it's a little bit smaller.
Yes.
But I like a more of a Jeep truck.
Rugged.
Like something I can bang around, go to the beach with, you know.
It's not matching quite with your turtleneck. That's my issue. So if
what would be that refined look? What would that be? Like an old, like a Mercedes, or like an old, like two-door?
I was thinking, so you know what? A two-door like Mercedes from like the early 80s, like a convertible, or like maybe like a 1960. We have a Lincoln Continental convertible out there, like from the 60s.
Is that the one with the suicide doors?
Yes.
Yeah, I could definitely
like Entourage style.
Yeah. That could be
Sunglasses,
me too.
Sunglasses, like turtleneck. That could go. Danny, thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it,
that
man.
Was enjoyable. We could go for a lot longer, but first ever repeat guest on
hopefully I delivered. I don't know. This Rebel Motors delivered. This place is insane.
Yeah, lots of fun. We'll see you next time.
You got it.
See, we're official here.
Bam.
You know, it's funny, we have these little, like,